Hello, Scorpio. If you're listening to these words or reading them quietly to yourself, maybe you're a bit like me, someone who has been moving through stretches of silence that are hard to name, not because life has been too loud, but because everything suddenly slowed down in a strange way, as if the world gently stepped back, just one pace, so you could stay still a little longer, right where you are. Moments like this often arrive without warning. No signs, no build-up, no dramatic turning point. You only notice it while walking down a familiar street, under the same yellow streetlights you've passed 100 times before. And suddenly your steps feel lighter, not because you chose to stop, but because something inside you is quietly asking for a little more time to breathe. I've noticed that Scorpio tends to move through moments like this in silence. You don't speak about it. You don't rush to share it. You simply stand there, as if inside a quiet room where every sound has been left outside the door. In that space, it's just you. And thoughts that haven't found their names yet. Sometimes this slowing down confuses other people. They might think you're hesitating or pulling away. But from where I stand, it doesn't really feel like stopping. It feels more like adjusting your breath, like a small flame, not flaring up, not going out, just quietly burning, enough to keep you warm. Scorpio has a very personal way of sensing life. You don't skim across experiences, you touch them. And when things slow down, you begin to notice details you once overlooked, a passing glance. A sentence that sounded casual at first, an ordinary evening that suddenly feels heavy without any clear reason why. Strange as it sounds, there are times when Scorpio feels like they're standing at a familiar crossroads within themselves. The road hasn't changed. The scenery looks the same, but something inside feels different, less rushed, less pressure to decide right away. Just a pause, long enough to see things a little more clearly. I don't see this as a sign of weakness. If anything, it feels like a very quiet kind of courage. The courage not to react immediately. The courage not to cover emotions with action. The courage to stay in that quiet room for a few more minutes. For Scorpio, silence isn't always about avoidance. Sometimes it's like setting a cup of coffee down on the table and not drinking it right away. You let the warmth spread first. You let the aroma reach you. And in that waiting space, you start to understand more clearly what you're actually feeling. If you're in a season like this, maybe there's nothing you need to do at all. No labels, no explanations. Just being there, watching, listening. Sometimes, slowing down like this is life's way of giving you a chance to look deeper, not to change anything right away, but to understand yourself just a little more. And maybe, just maybe, that alone is already enough. Enough to keep you from rushing forward. Enough to let yourself stay a little longer inside that hazy, uncertain feeling. There are things in life that don't need to be named right away. They're like a thin layer of morning mist on the road. If you lean in too close, it disappears. But if you simply slow your steps, you'll see it shimmer in its own quiet way. And then, in the middle of days that seem completely ordinary, a small signal appears, so subtle that if you're too busy, you might miss it. A passing remark from someone, nothing intentional, nothing dramatic, yet it arrives at exactly the right moment. A line of text you come across by chance, not searching for it, not expecting it, just something your eyes happen to land on. Or maybe it's a moment beneath a streetlight late at night, the road emptier than usual, and your chest suddenly feels heavy in a way that's hard to explain. Those signals don't come to impress you. They aren't loud. They don't demand attention. They're more like a soft knock on a door that's been closed for a long time, gentle enough not to startle you, but clear enough to let you know someone is standing just outside. And what's strange is that Scorpio often senses these signals even before understanding what they are. For some reason, in that exact moment, you pause. Not out of curiosity, but because something inside you shifts, quietly. A feeling that's thin, yet deep, like placing your hand in the water and knowing the current beneath is far from still. You don't have answers. You don't go looking for them. Just a brief, honest thought drifts through you. It feels like something is beginning to reveal itself. Scorpio is used to keeping sensations like this private. You don't rush to share them. You let them stay silently, like a small folded note tucked into a pocket. Every so often, you touch it, just to make sure it's still there. And each time you do, the feeling becomes a little clearer. Not a complete story, but an intuition that's hard to ignore. There are evenings when everything around you is settled that you start to notice those small signals were never random. On their own, they're fragile. But placed side by side, they form a rhythm you recognize. Like distant lights along a long road, each one alone doesn't say much, but together they guide you forward without the need for a map. And maybe this is where Scorpio senses a very subtle shift. Not a change in direction, but a change in perspective. You no longer see these chance moments as purely accidental. You allow them to exist without forcing them to mean anything right away. You let them stay, quietly accompanying you. Not clear, not complete, but enough to catch your attention. And sometimes, I'm in a life already filled with so much noise. Simply noticing something that small is already something very different. Different this time because you don't brush it aside the way you used to. You let it stay, quietly, like a whisper that doesn't need an answer right away. And in that silence, a familiar Scorpio habit becomes very clear again. The habit of keeping everything inside. You've never been someone who talks easily about emotions. Not because there's nothing to say, but because what you feel often runs too deep to be shaped into words right away. You're used to observing first, letting things settle, and only then reaching toward them. Like standing at the edge of dark water, you don't throw a stone to test how deep it is. You lean in, you look for a long time, you sense the subtle movement underneath. There are days when your emotions feel like a small flame, burning quietly in a closed room. Not flaring up, not showing off, but always there. Others might not see it, but you know it exists. It keeps you warm when you need it, and sometimes keeps you awake when you pay it too much attention. Because you've learned to live with that flame, Scorpio tends to be especially sensitive to anything that touches the deeper layers within. If a piece of information passes by without reaching that inner space, you let it go almost instantly. But if it lands in the right place, you know right away. No analysis, no proof. Just a very clear, steady feeling, felt quietly. On the outside, you may still look calm. You still smile. You still go about your day. But inside, you've started listening more closely, not to others, but to yourself. Thoughts you once ignored return, without noise, without urgency, just sitting there, waiting for you to face them. Scorpio has a very particular way of holding moments like this. You don't rush to ask questions. You don't rush to explain. You let the information remain in your inner space, like placing a small object on a table and slowly walking around it. Each time you pass by, you notice a new angle, a detail you didn't see before. And through this process, you might not be searching for answers at all. What you're really looking for is resonance, a familiar feeling, like hearing an old song late at night, not to relive the past, but to understand more clearly what you're feeling right now. Keeping everything inside isn't always easy, but for Scorpio, it's how you protect your depth, and it's often within that quiet or private space that the most important things are recognized. Not through loud declarations, but through a kind of listening that's deeply honest. And over time, that kind of listening often leads Scorpio to a feeling that's very familiar. The feeling of standing at an old crossroads, a place where you've paused more than once before. This moment isn't new. It carries the shape of earlier times when you quietly asked yourself whether to stay silent a little longer or open your heart just a bit more, whether to let things pass or stop long enough to really look. The road is still the same road. The signs haven't changed. But standing there now, you notice something different. You're no longer in a hurry. Maybe it's because you've traveled far enough to understand that not every crossroads asks for an immediate decision. Some simply ask you to stand still a moment longer, to feel the ground beneath your feet, to hear the wind move past you, to see the distant lights a little more clearly. And in that waiting space, what changes isn't the road itself, it's how you're present with it. Scorpio tends to carry memories of old choices for a long time, not to dwell in regret, but to recognize yourself in each pause along the way. You remember the feeling of rushing. You remember the weight of staying silent for too long. And those memories are what make this pause feel different now. Calmer, slower, as if you've grown used to not needing to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. There are evenings, walking familiar streets under late-night lights, when you realize you're no longer tense about choices the way you once were. Well, not because everything is clear, but because you've accepted that uncertainty has its place too. That not every question needs an answer right away. That sometimes, simply looking at the road from a distance is enough to know you don't need to step forward yet. This feeling carries a quiet steadiness. Nothing showy, nothing loud. It's like standing in a calm room with just enough light, and for the first time, not feeling the need to turn on another lamp. You see things clearly in your own way, and you trust that feeling, not as a promise, but as a gentle agreement with yourself. At that familiar crossroads, Scorpio no longer looks only ahead. You glance back at the footprints you've left behind, not to measure right or wrong, but to notice how much you've grown with every step. And maybe it's right there, in that still moment, that you begin to understand something quietly true. Sometimes the deepest change doesn't come from choosing a new path, but from walking the same one with an entirely different way of seeing. And when that way of seeing begins to change, the things you once thought of as important no longer arrive the way they used to. They don't rush in. They don't make your heart jump. They don't demand an immediate response. They arrive slowly, softly, almost blending into the rhythm of everyday life. There are very early mornings like that, when the light is still thin, like a veil of mist. You're standing by a window or stepping outside for a moment, and without knowing why, your mind drifts back to something from the past, not out of nostalgia, but because it suddenly feels clearer. And like early morning light, at first you're not sure it's even there, but if you stand still a little longer, shapes begin to form. Edges soften. Things take on meaning without effort. Important messages tend to arrive this way. They don't come with noise. They don't knock on the door. They simply appear quietly, in a moment when you're not on guard. Maybe when you remember a conversation that once seemed insignificant. Maybe when you realize you've been silent for too long, or trying too hard for something that no longer fits. And sometimes, that message isn't about anyone else at all. It's about you. Scorpio usually recognizes this instantly, not through logic, but through feeling. A feeling that's thin, yet deep, like touching an old wall and realizing it has warmed over time. There's no shock, no denial, or you just stand there, giving the truth enough space to fully reveal itself. What's surprising is that when important realizations arrive this way, they don't unsettle you, they quiet you. You begin to look back at a relationship you once worked hard to protect, a decision you were sure was right, a version of yourself you carried for a long time. There's no judgment, just a gentle acknowledgement that maybe you've been seeing everything from a different angle for quite a while now. And once the light becomes clear enough, you know you can't return to the old way of thinking. Not because it was wrong, but because you've grown beyond it. Like when the sun has risen high, you can't pretend it's still night. You don't need to act right away. You only need to accept that you see more clearly now. Scorpio rarely shares moments like this with many people. You keep them to yourself. You let them settle. You let them blend into your breathing. You don't call it a big change. You think of it as a very small adjustment, just enough for something inside you to begin shifting. And maybe that's why the most important messages are the ones that arrive in silence. They don't knock you off balance, but they carry enough weight to help you move forward with more clarity and a deeper honesty with yourself. And from that clarity, something very different happens. You no longer feel the need to react right away. Strange, isn't it? There were times in the past when even the smallest signal was enough to make you want to sort everything out, to ask questions, to know, to settle it, just so your heart wouldn't be left hanging. But this time, it's different. You're not rushing. Not because you don't care, but because you realized you don't have to chase your own emotions anymore. You let the message stay where it is. You don't push it away. You don't hold onto it tightly either. You simply allow it to exist, like setting a cup of coffee down on the table early in the morning. You don't drink it right away. You let the warmth spread. You let the aroma rise. You let the room slowly feel familiar again. In that waiting space, nothing is frozen. Things are still moving, just very gently, enough for you to notice. Scorpio isn't usually comfortable waiting like this. You're used to going deep, used to getting straight to the core. But when you allow yourself not to react immediately, you begin to see details you once overlooked. A small emotion you brushed aside, a thought you labeled as unimportant, a personal boundary you crossed simply because you wanted clarity too soon. There are evenings when the room feels quieter than usual. You sit there, letting your thoughts drift without trying to steer them. No searching for answers, no rearranging old memories, just listening. And in that listening, you realize there are many things you've always known, but never allowed yourself to admit. This waiting isn't empty at all. It's full of small, honest realizations. You begin to tell the difference between old reflexes and emotions that truly belong to the present moment. You see that you don't need to explain everything to anyone. You don't need to prove that you were right or wrong. When you don't react too quickly, Scorpio becomes gentler with themselves. Not weaker, just softer in the right places. Like a small flame sheltered from the wind. It doesn't go out, it simply burns more evenly. You still carry your depth, but you no longer let that depth pull you forward too fast. And in that very quiet pause, you begin to understand something subtle. Sometimes, what matters most isn't what you do next, but allowing yourself to not do anything yet. Just being there, just feeling, and letting what truly needs to be seen slowly come into view, in the most natural way possible. And when you stop pushing that moment to become clearer, a very gentle movement begins inside you, so subtle that if you weren't truly listening, you might not even notice it. On the outside, everything looks the same. Familiar streets are still full of people passing by, and the streetlights still turn on right on time. Life doesn't pause to wait for you to understand anything. But inside, something loosens. You're no longer holding yourself so tightly. You stop raising those invisible defenses every time something touches a sensitive place. Just a little, but enough for you to feel the difference. Scorpio is used to staying alert, not because you don't trust others, but because you understand how deep emotions can go. You learn to control them, so they wouldn't carry you too far. But this time, strength doesn't come from gripping harder. It comes from the moment you allow yourself to soften, at exactly the right time. There are evenings when you're sitting alone in a quiet room, no music playing, no extra lights turned on, and suddenly, you notice you're breathing more lightly. Well, not because every problem has disappeared, but because you're no longer fighting what you feel. You let emotions arrive, you let them stay, and then you let them leave on their own once they've done what they needed to do. That inner movement isn't loud. It doesn't make you want to change your life overnight. It simply allows you to look more directly at things you once avoided. A small fear, a desire you never spoke out loud, a truth you sensed long ago but weren't ready to touch. And strangely enough, when you finally face them, they're not as frightening as you imagined. They don't make you weaker. Instead, they give you a different kind of steadiness. Not the kind that comes from controlling everything, but from knowing where you are inside your own emotions. Scorpio is still deep, still strong, but this time, that strength takes the shape of honesty. Honesty about what you feel. even when you don't yet know what to do with it. Honesty about the fact that sometimes you need time, you need quiet, you need a safe space for emotions to breathe. And within that very gentle movement, you don't become someone else. You simply become more yourself, a little less tense, a little less guarded, a little closer to who you truly are. Just that much. And sometimes, those small shifts are enough to help everything inside you fall back into its natural rhythm. And as that rhythm slowly settles, you no longer feel the need to prove anything or explain yourself to anyone. This moment doesn't need someone else to believe in it for you. No nod of approval, no reassurance. But it's enough that you know you were there, that you felt it, that you moved through those quiet spaces with a real sense of presence. Some things in life only hold meaning when they're kept to yourself, not because they're secret, but because they're fragile in their own way. Looking back, you might notice that you didn't do anything particularly dramatic. No bold decisions, no obvious turning point. You simply allowed yourself to slow down, to listen more deeply, and to stop dismissing what you were feeling. And sometimes, it's that very simplicity that opens up a sense of fullness you once searched for somewhere else. If you're Scorpio, you may recognize a part of yourself somewhere in this story, in quiet evenings, in moments spent beneath late-night streetlights, so in that hesitant yet very real feeling before something finds its name. And if you're not, this can still be just a small, very human slice of life, about knowing when to pause and trusting that listening to yourself is also a way of living more fully. And maybe, in the silence that follows these words, you'll find yourself wondering whether you've ever experienced a moment like that. A moment that didn't need anyone else to understand, didn't need anyone else to believe, only needed you to feel it clearly enough to remember. The story can rest here for now, but that slower rhythm, if you pay attention, may still be gently lingering somewhere inside you,